Tess started a new job with a genuinely good benefit, an employer that matched 50 cents on every dollar contributed to a retirement account. Up to 6% of salary. Free money, essentially, just for signing a form. Tess didn't sign the form, not out of laziness, and not because the match wasn't understood. Tess understood it completely and thought it sounded great. Tess didn't sign it because the enrollment page listed 31 different fund options, each with its own name, its own risk category, its own multi-page fact sheet, and no obvious way to know which one was actually right. So Tess closed the tab, planning to come back to it once there was time to research properly. That was 14 months ago. The tab never got reopened. 14 months of employer match. Gone. Not because Tess didn't want it, but because there were too many good options to comfortably choose from any of them. This is one of the strangest, most well-documented findings in behavioral economics. And it directly contradicts what almost everyone assumes about choice. More options should make it easier to find something good. In a genuinely famous 2000 study, researchers Sheena, Iyengar, and Lepper set up a tasting table at an upscale grocery store, sometimes displaying 6 varieties of jam, sometimes displaying 24. The bigger display attracted more browsers. People like looking at more options, at least at first. But when it came time to actually buy, only 3% of shoppers at the 24 jam table made a purchase. At the 6 jam table, 30% did, 10 times the purchase rate. From fewer choices, not more. What made this finding so striking to researchers at the time was how directly it cut against standard economic assumptions. Classical economic theory generally treats more options as strictly better, or at worst neutral. A rational shopper can always just ignore choices they don't want. So extra options should never make anyone worse off. The jam study showed real people don't actually work that way. The mental cost of comparing 24 options against each other turned out to outweigh whatever benefit came from having more of them. And that cost was large enough to affect actual purchasing behavior, not just reported preference or stated satisfaction. More options didn't help people find their favorite jam. It made choosing at all feel harder, more consequential, more likely to be wrong somehow. And when a decision starts to feel like it might be wrong no matter what you pick, the easiest available option becomes picking nothing. Iyengar went on to study this exact mechanism in a context far more consequential than jam, working with data from actual retirement plans. She and her colleagues found that employee participation in 401,000 plans dropped as the number of fund options offered increased. Plans offering just a handful of funds saw meaningfully higher enrollment than plans offering dozens. Every additional fund option, on average, made employees slightly less likely to participate at all, not because more options are bad in theory, but because more options make the decision feel heavier, and a heavier decision is easier to indefinitely postpone than a light one. The scale of this research is part of what makes it hard to dismiss. This wasn't a single office or a small sample. It drew on records from hundreds of retirement plans and hundreds of thousands of actual employees, comparing real enrollment behavior against the actual number of funds each specific plan offered. The pattern held up consistently. More funds, measurably lower participation, even though every single one of those additional funds was, individually, a perfectly reasonable, well-managed option that some employees somewhere might genuinely have preferred. This is exactly what happened to Tess. Almost to the letter. 31 funds isn't a helpful abundance of choice. It's 31 individual opportunities to make the wrong call, each one requiring research Tess didn't have time for, stacked in front of a decision that felt too important to make carelessly and too complicated to make carefully, which left exactly one option that required no research at all: doing nothing. Here's what makes this particularly expensive, in a way that's worth sitting with directly. Doing nothing didn't feel like a decision to Tess. It felt like a delay, a temporary state, a tab left open on purpose to return to later. But the employer match doesn't pause for a tab to be reopened. Every paycheck that passed without enrollment was a paycheck where free money and instant, guaranteed 50% return, better than almost any investment return available anywhere, simply expired permanently, never coming back. While Tess believed, honestly, that nothing had really been decided yet, That's the core of why choice overload is so much more costly than ordinary procrastination. Procrastination usually feels uncomfortable while it's happening, a small, nagging awareness that something's being avoided. Choice overload often doesn't feel like avoidance at all. It feels like appropriate caution, like the responsible thing to do before making an important financial decision. Tess wasn't being careless. Tess was being careful in a way that, paradoxically, prevented any actual decision from ever getting made. So what actually works? According to the same research, once the trap is understood, Iyengar's later work, along with a large body of research that followed, points toward a specific, almost counterintuitive fix, reducing the effective number of choices being evaluated at once. Even when the full menu of options stays exactly the same. Structuring a smaller set of clearly labeled defaults, a simple target date fund, sorted by expected retirement here, for instance, turns a 31-option research project into a much smaller, much lighter decision. Which age range am I closest to? The other funds don't disappear. They just stop being the thing standing between someone and starting. This is worth naming precisely, because it's easy to mistake for just pick something at random, which isn't quite the same thing and doesn't work nearly as well. The fix isn't lowering the bar for the decision. It's narrowing the field being actively compared, so the decision that does get made is still reasonable, just no longer paralyzed by having to be weighed against 30 competing alternatives before it's allowed to happen at all. Tess eventually got unstuck the same way, without waiting for enough free time to research all 31 funds properly. A coworker mentioned the plan defaulted new employees into a single target date fund unless they actively chose otherwise, information that had been sitting in the enrollment paperwork the entire 14 months, buried under everything else competing for attention on that same page. Tess didn't need to become an expert in 31 funds. Tess needed to notice there was a single, reasonable, pre-sorted option that didn't require becoming one. The form got signed in about 90 seconds once Tess actually understood what it was asking. 14 months of mismatch doesn't come back. What changed was everything going forward. And the actual lesson wasn't about retirement funds specifically. It was about recognizing, honestly, when careful research has quietly turned into a permanent excuse not to decide, and about how often the fix for too many good options isn't finding the single best one. It's finding any reasonable one, and letting that be enough to actually start. This pattern shows up well beyond retirement accounts. Once you know to look for it, a streaming service with too many shows produces more scrolling than watching. A restaurant menu with 40 entrees produces more hesitation than hunger satisfaction. A grocery aisle with 30 types of pasta sauce produces shoppers standing there longer, not shoppers more confident in what they picked. None of these are really about the specific product. They're all the same jam table, wearing a different label, quietly making a decision feel too important to make quickly. Right up until quickly is the only version of the decision that was ever actually going to get made at all. If this made you think about a decision you've been getting to for longer than you'd like to admit, subscribe, because we'll keep telling these stories the psychology first, the money second, the same way we always have. Same honest stories, same simple truth. See you in the next one.